So, first of all, thanks for having me along tonight. It's always nice to hang out with forest school practitioners and yeah, talk to like-minded folks. So appreciate the invitation. Now, as we go through, it's probably going to be relatively informal. I've been working all day, you probably have too. I'll talk for a bit and then we'll probably stop and have a bit of chat, and then I'll talk a bit more and then we'll stop and have a bit more chat. And as we go through the webinar, if you start thinking of like comments or responses or questions that you've got, please just pop them in the chat. I might not be able to always track and respond to them in the moment, but at certain points in my like notes, I've put little reminders to myself to stop and review what's in the chat and then have a bit more interaction and then go back to some of the content. So hopefully that'll keep things a bit more lively and break up the me talking aspect a bit. I've also got a small number of slides, but I'm a bit rubbish at putting slides together, and they're mostly just pretty pictures or like that I've taken because I like doing photography. That's part of my nature connection practice. So I'll probably put those up and I might turn them on and off so that you're not just staring at the same slide for ages. And at the end, if you want, because I haven't got lots of notes and content on the slides, there's no point me really sending you those. They probably have one word on each slide and then a nice picture. But if you'd like a transcript or my notes that I use to prepare for this talk, I'm really happy to send you that because that's got a lot of the content. And I can also send you a list of the references that I mention and any books and opportunities and so on. So just drop me an email through my website or through LinkedIn. I'll put up a slide in a second with my contact details on there. In fact, I can do that now. Let's put the first pretty picture up. That's it, that one. Oops, hang on, I need to hit slideshow. Then hit share. You can tell this is a COVID era picture because I've just noticed my husband, even though we're outside, has a mask on, which means it was probably 2021 when everyone was still being super careful whenever we saw any friends or anything. Okay, so some of this webinar is going to be similar to the talk I gave at the Forest School conference because a whole bunch of people that asked me to come and do that said that they missed it and would quite like it if I did it again. So there'll be some similar content, but because, you know, we're here and we don't have to be as formal as a keynote, hopefully I'm intending to throw in some different stuff and have more dialogue, and your questions will prompt me to say different things. So it will be a different beast in that way as well. But basically, the reason I think I was asked to do that keynote at the conference and to offer the webinar today is because I've worked with a few forest school folk over the last few years through my nature connection work, and they know that I've spent the last 20 years or so really trying to figure out how nature connection and also how learning from nature can help us be better citizens and better caretakers of the planet. So really looking at the link between nature connection and, you know, environmental responsibility and also pro-social behavior. Like, I'm really interested in the link between nature connection, environmental mindsets, and also community building. Like, that's kind of my ballpark, the things that I'm interested in. But along the way, I've had quite a journey. I started out as a marine mammal biologist, which was really my kind of ideal career that I really wanted, but was somehow weirdly unsatisfying because I wanted to understand the root causes and the bigger solutions to what was happening in the world. And so I kind of went through all these iterations of being a wildlife guide, a nature educator, a deep nature connection practitioner, and a sustainability trainer. And I think I'm one of those people that just love lifelong learning as well. I'm always wanting to go on courses and learn from other practitioners. And so I'm constantly adding kind of tools to my virtual tool belt. It's probably getting a bit heavy at this point, and I can't remember what's in there, but anyway. But these days I still do a bit of all those things, keep my foot in with the marine wildlife stuff by training marine wildlife operators how to behave safely around wildlife and habitats. The way I pay the bills is that I work for an amazing charity called Transition Network 3 days a week, which supports local communities in around 2,000 groups around 40 countries to do climate change resilience projects in their local communities. So if you've heard of Transition Towns, I work for the charity that supports them. And in the other days of the week, I'm basically developing and offering various talks like this and courses online and in person and bits of support for groups to help them help their participants and local communities become better ecological citizens. So, and that's all kind of new and emerging work that's coming from, you know, my interests as they've emerged over the last few years, and from these practices that I'm going to share with you today. So let's move on to the next slide. Basically, along the way, I've kind of been, I guess I've been oriented around some key questions, and kind of the sense of a kind of clear need in the world to move from kind of cultures and systems of domination, individualism, competition, extraction, you know, how we're damaging people and damaging nature, to cultures and systems that are more about partnership, cooperation, reciprocity, contribution. Because I guess the question ever since I was a little girl is like, why do we cause harm to the world and each other? You know, why are we hurting this beautiful planet that we live on? Why are we so unpleasant to each other? And as an ecologist, as I kind of learned about ecosystems and, you know, how species and habitats are dependent on each other, especially in more recent years with more modern ecology, which I didn't really get at university, it was a bit reductionist, to really kind of understand how we can recognize and value interconnection and interdependence. And through that recognition and valuing, how we can become more positive contributors to society and to the rest of nature. Because I feel like, I don't know about you, but the more I got into kind of wildlife conservation and then nature connection and nature education, the more I started to think that people were a bit of a plague on the planet. You know, maybe it would be better if we weren't here. And I've come full circle to a completely different place now. And I think that that's helpful because I just see that there's such a lot of despair and overwhelm out there about the situation that we're in, and then how do we support young people and adults to deal with that and to find a place of kind of active hope and sustained action, because we know we need to make profound changes, right? But how do we find the will and the skill to be able to do that without completely getting overwhelmed and burning out? So this is kind of some of my core questions. And a question that I'm really loving at the moment, which is my next slide, oops, no, 1, 2, 5, is what if we could create a future we were proud to leave behind? And I love these what if questions. And what if is kind of the founder of Transition Towns, Rob Hopkins, or one of the co-founders. He has a book called What If, and he has a podcast which is all about what if. And he is kind of a leader in radical imagination, you know, to ask these big what if questions that really inspire us and kind of pull us forward. And this particular question, what if we could create a future we were proud to leave behind, is I think I heard it from Manda Scott, and I don't know if some of you have come across Manda Scott's book. She wrote the Rome books and the Boudica series, which was about pre-Roman Britain and the kind of Celtic nature connected times. And she wrote that specifically because she wanted to show that pre-colonization, even these lands, you know, were more nature connected and community oriented. And now, as a writer, she's an award-winning writer. She's gone on to write about what she's calling through-topias. And I think this is fascinating because for my English A-level, I was already really interested in, like, how do we make the world a better place? And I read utopian fiction and kind of did my little dissertation, or whatever you call it, at A-level on utopian books. And then, you know, as I've gone through life, I've realized there's so many dystopian stories out there. You know, a lot of the films and the TV series we watch are kind of all very dystopian. And I remember when I first encountered Transition Towns, what I loved was one of the trainers saying, if we don't have a kind of clear vision of a preferred future, of a destination that we want to move towards, how are we supposed to ever get there? You know, it's very difficult to get to a destination if you don't have a clear sense of where it is and a bit of a map to get there. But the criticism with dystopias is that they just lead to kind of despair and overwhelm and depression and, you know, doomerism and all that kind of stuff. But the criticism of utopias, or utopian kind of visions of the future, is they're idealistic, and also they don't show you how to get there. It's all like, hey, we already got here and everything's groovy, to use one of Louise's favorite words. But but yeah, so this idea of through-topia is, let's create and articulate a vision of a preferred future, one that we feel like we probably could get to, and then let's actually map out the ways that we can get there and the things that we could each do as practitioners, as educators, to help us get there, to help young people get there. So it's about moving from where we are now to where we want to be. And if you think that sounds interesting, check out Amanda Scott's podcast, Accidental Gods, which is based on the premise that we have, well, how does it go? The neurobiology of hunter-gatherers, the institutions of medieval times, but the technology of gods, and that this is a dangerous situation to be in. But anyway, she interviews lots of very interesting people. And now I'm about to say that I'm going to be on her podcast soon, which makes it sound like I think I'm very interesting, which is not what I quite meant. But anyway, I've dug my own hole there. But I am going to be on her podcast in July, which is exciting. And while we're mentioning podcasts, I'm also going to be on Marina Robb's Wild Minds podcast in July. So look out for those, and I'll put the links to those on my website too. Okay, but Fruitopias are cool, and Manda has literally just published a new book. It's a fiction book, but it's an amazing work of fiction called Any Human Power. And it's one of the first works of Fruitopian fiction, which really kind of maps out like, how could we build a better world together? And it's very cool. It's a great story as well. She is a good writer. Anyway, what if we could create a future we were proud to leave behind? And for me, that's all about helping people become ecological citizens and participate and contribute in building this future. And this picture is of this amazing ecological co-housing that I've had the great privilege to move to in the last 6 months. And we've got solar panels, and we've got shared veggie gardens, and we've got composting, and it's a very incredible practical example of what a group of people can do together to try and create a more regenerative future, I guess. So it's giving me a lot of good ideas living here. Anyway, so that's all very exciting. But that has all stemmed from me basically suffering from kind of generalized anxiety disorder most of my life about the future that we're growing into and the kind of world that we're handing over to the next generations. And I think I've been in touch with that anxiety since I was about 8 or 9 years old. And it's been a big force in my life and made me ill numerous times. And that has been something that has often led me to want to turn away, shut down, give up doing any kind of nature connection or climate oriented work. It's just sometimes just feels too big and too overwhelming. And I don't know if you felt the same, but I've met plenty of people that have, who work in our kind of fields. So if you are anything like me, you might also worry about the future, and that could be climate change or biodiversity loss or violence or war or any of the social or economic issues that are around at the moment, and that more and more people are calling the poly crisis, because they're interrelated, right? They're because of the kind of systems and culture that has become dominant in the last 150 years or so, and that is causing so many issues for so many people and for the planet. So as forest school practitioners, you might also be really wondering how things are going to be for the young people in your life. You might be noticing that they're feeling a lot of responsibility and burden in the face of that. I certainly have noticed in the young people I hang out with that those fears seem to be contributing to worsening mental health. Yeah, and obviously it can be quite hard to reach people sometimes. And I've also found that, whether it's transition towns or whether it's nature connection programs or environmental education, sometimes it's hard to get the funding or the credibility or the partners that are helpful, because it's difficult to kind of provide evidence that these things are really transformative and actually are part of the solution. And what's been really lovely actually in the last couple of months since I met some of you at the conference is I've had the opportunity to work with an urban sustainability and kind of urban, she's an architect, a sustainability architect from Open University, and we've been putting together grant applications to kind of test out this kind of package of transformative practices that we think are really support people to become ecological citizens. So we're doing these research applications. We're going to then hopefully do this kind of series of trainings in Devon and Dorset, looking at the combination of things I'm going to talk about today. But what it's made me do, hang on, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. What it's made me do is do a bunch of research, which I haven't done for a while. So I've been like finding all these great papers on the impact, the transformative impact of nature connection, and how we can measure nature connection and nature relatedness. And some of you probably have all of this up your sleeves already and have had to write your own research applications or funding applications or whatever. But if you haven't and you would find this useful, again, let me know, because I've got these papers now as PDFs. I've got the references. Some of them are behind paywalls, but my colleague at the university sent me copies, so I can send you copies. And some of them are fab because they're like, this one's my favorite. Nature connection, providing a pathway from personal to planetary health. Awesome. That's a really good one. And then some of them are really good because they're like a meta-analysis of human connection to nature and pro-environmental behavior, and multidisciplinary review of human nature connection. So they kind of go over all the literature from the last 15 years and summarize the benefits. And that is really helpful. So apologies if I'm teaching you to suck eggs with that and you've already done all that. But if you haven't, let's not reinvent wheels, and I'm happy to send you those. All right. So where are we? Yeah, so I guess I've explained, what's motivated me to get into this, which is my own sense of anxiety and overwhelm and the exhaustion that can come with that, right? Just kind of several times in my life, kind of burning out because I felt like it was all a bit much. So what I've been looking for is a way to feel kind of satisfied with the contribution that I'm able to make, to feel like it's having meaningful impact on the people I work with, whether that's, families doing nature connection stuff, or whether it's communities that are doing climate resilience projects or things like that. And what I'm really looking for, I guess, or I've come to believe, is that if we bring certain transformative practices into our work, we can help people sort of develop it's almost like there's a certain measures that can come from that. So one of them is to feel more connected to nature and each other, to feel that sense of connection and support, and the kind of empathy that comes from that, which I've then seen leads to people becoming a lot more motivated to get involved in change and to make change, because probably most of you know that kind of cognitive only based education doesn't tend to lead to behavior change. It's not how attitudes and behaviors change. It's through like our emotions and our experiences and those sorts of things that we tend to change our behavior and attitudes. So we need to give people those deeper experiences where there's a context, a container for transformation to happen, right? So how do we provide that deeper connection, which leads to that deeper empathy and motivation? And then on top of that, how do we get people to be resilient in the face of the challenges that they're facing, in the face of the bad news that comes down the line? So connected and motivated, resilient, but also confident that we and the people we work with can actually contribute to meaningful change. So what are the skills and capacities we need to feel that sense of agency and empowerment? So I think those are kind of a package of outcomes that we want. And there's some different things we can do to support that. And of course, along the way, we want to be able to make a living and have a balanced life and even have a joyful life. It's quite a lot to ask for, but I do think it's possible. And I'm not saying I'm perfectly there, but I think I've made some progress along the way on these measures. Yeah, and I would really like it if Forest School and other nature connection and nature-based social change programs were just recognised for their transformative value more, and were able to attract more funding and reach more people. And it's the same with transition towns. We're constantly looking to kind of evidence that these things really, really work, and to get them more kind of credibility and visibility and reach. Yeah, where are we at? 20 minutes or so. Okay, so all right, let's talk about the 3 paths to ecological citizenship. And some of these, this will be familiar to some of you that came to my talk. So across these kind of, I guess it's about 25 years now of working with people and wildlife and education and sustainability, I've had a chance to try a lot of different practices and to combine them in various different ways and see what happens when you offer different kinds of experience. And for a start, I've noticed it's not very effective either in, my own programs to sort of lecture people, or to nudge or manipulate or coerce or guilt trip people into behavior change. It doesn't really work, and I think it's pretty unethical. But what we can do, and what often works better, is to create those experiences and conditions where new perspectives, new relationships, new emotional connections, and sort of deep shifts in mindsets and behaviours can occur that can then lead to these more pro-social and pro-environmental behaviours, which is what I'm calling ecological citizenship, right? I need a drink. I've also just noticed that my battery charger is not up here, it's downstairs. So in a minute, I might go and holler for my husband to bring that up. It's very bad planning of me. It's because I was doing a standing desk today, which is supposed to be much healthier for you in the kitchen. So, and then I came up here for that. Anyway, so what do I mean by ecological citizenship? I like this term because I feel like it combines action on behalf of our communities, you know, being a citizen of our communities and contributing, and also being a citizen of the living world, the ecological citizenship idea. So it kind of gives the idea that we're being a participant and a contributor in our living world and in our human communities, and that those things are related. And what I'm kind of calling the 3 pathways or the 3 pillars for developing that at the moment are, I can put up another slide for this one. Oh, it's on my other screen. Right, nature and people connection practices as one, learning from and emulating nature, which is sometimes called biomimicry, and that's something that I'm really excited about, and I'm going to talk about a bit more today. And then building communities. And I think there's at least 3 different kinds of community building we can do. It's like building a community of support around yourself and your work, building communities of practice, you know, peer-to-peer mentoring people you're learning and practicing with, and supporting more professionally, and then building communities of place, you know, actually getting things going in your local area or joining in with things that are happening in your local area. So there's 3 kind of broad pathways, but each one of them is quite a big body of work in its own right. And I'm not expecting us all to learn everything about these 3 things, but there are actually some quite simple practices from each of these, or quite simple things we can do in our lives, that I think we can bring into our programs and bring into our daily lives that kind of create the opportunities for transformation to happen. What is the next slide? Yeah, we don't need that one yet. Okay. All right, so pause for a second while I figure out what to do next. Has anyone, by the way, do write thoughts, comments, questions in the chat, so we've got something to talk about when I run out of things to say for a minute and want to hear from you. Start stacking them up, please. Okay, so right, an example of how this all came about for me, why I put these things together, is my own journey, basically. You know, that's sometimes a good place to start. And I was one of these children that love animals, and I collect hundreds of, and I lived in a city, so I didn't really have a good way to be nature connected. So my good way to be nature connected is I collected hundreds of stuffed animals and, you know, filled my entire room with like realistic stuffed animals. And actually, this is embarrassing, but I still have some of them, like this guy. You know, there's still otters and walruses and bears and, you know, animals kicking around in my house all over the place. So I loved animals. And as I got a bit older, you know, it was the 80s, so I was hearing about rainforest and the ozone and all these sorts of things. Got very worried about all of that. And that's what led me to to go into zoology and marine mammal biology, which was, I mean, it was really a dream come true. I got to go and play with dolphins in Florida and sea otters in California and whales in Iceland. And it was very cool. I got to go and speak at conferences. It was great. And you would think, having got into something so kind of trendy and groovy and competitive, I would have stayed there. But foolishly, I didn't. And the reason for that is because I really wanted to understand why society just kept damaging these species and habitats. But as I learned more, I feel like I just got more overwhelmed and a bit more despairing about it. Like, I think there was something in me that thought, if I could really understand this global system or these crises and what was causing them, I think somewhere in my head there was a fantasy that I'd find like a magic button or a magic lever that would be the most impactful thing that I could do, that I would therefore feel better and like I was really making a difference. And that's probably just my own pathology. But you know, I think that's what was happening in reflection. And I really got to a bit of a crunch point with that by about 2012, and was working at a sustainability education centre, and pretty much just had a bit of a meltdown with it all, because I just couldn't handle the pressure I was putting myself under. But at that time, I started to encounter the work of John Young and the Art of Mentoring and 8 Shields. And I'd be really interested to know how many of you have encountered any of that work under any of those names. It's now called Living Connection First as well. Okay, cool. Some of you, great, brilliant. So I went on my first Art of Mentoring in 2011, and then sort of went on quite a big learning journey with that over the next few years. And that, I think, first of all, helped to settle my own nervous system and give me that felt sense of connection and a place to go to for answers and solace and so on, you know, to go off in the woods and do my sit spot or go wandering. But also to start learning the design principles, you know, and how we could apply those to our organizations, to our lives, to the programs I was running. So I was running wildlife holidays at that point with families, and I was the manager at a sustainable living retreat centre. So people would come on these programs, we would take them out, and before I applied those deep nature connection design frameworks and practices, people would have a lovely time, right? They'd say it's hard not to have a lovely time in Scotland when you go and see dolphins and seals. But once I started bringing in those practices, I mean, it's a bit of a terrible measure, but people would be crying by Tuesday, like full of wonder, full of awe. The world's so amazing. I just want to help. I want to, you know, people saying they wanted to change their careers. I mean, it's a bit of a responsibility in a way, but that's the kind of transformative power of some of these practices. And so, and then alongside that, I became a Gaia education trainer, which is all about the 4 dimensions of sustainability and how to create regenerative communities. And then, as you know, I went on to work with transition towns. And then most recently, I got interested in this biomimicry and became a biomimicry educator. And what those 3 bodies of work gave me, the Gaia, transition and biomimicry work, were the next kind of helpful steps in answering that question, you know, how can we support people to become better ecological citizens? Because I knew that nature connection practices were part of the answer, because I'd seen their transformative power in creating empathy and motivation. But I'd also seen and experienced personally that when we get super connected, we can hit a massive wall of grief about like how messed up things are. And it's just really painful. I mean, I feel like layers of armoring and strategy were stripped away from me during doing all those connection processes, and have made me kind of quite a highly sensitive person that struggles a bit now to read the news or watch films that have violence in them or any of that kind of thing. And maybe that's a good thing to be that sensitive, but it also makes it quite painful to be in the world. And sometimes, you know, I feel like I need something more to kind of keep me engaged in sustained action. So that's what I was looking for. And I feel like that's what those bodies of work gave me, and particularly biomimicry, because it's full of like design skills, and it sort of helps you to plug into the 3.8 billion years of wisdom in nature and the solutions in natural principles and natural patterns and natural systems, to have a source of information that we can go towards for solutions. Because you've probably heard this this quote that we can't solve the problems of today with the thinking that created them, which kind of begs the question, well, where the hell do we get the new thinking from? Because we were all brought up in this current society, well, those of us, I mean, unless we're from Indigenous communities. So, which is a very good place to find alternative wisdom, land connected people. However, we can look directly to nature as well. We can't all go and learn from Indigenous peoples. They've got their own stuff to deal with, and it's a bit annoying when we keep going and asking for their help when they've got all their own stuff to deal with. So really, we should be uplifting their agendas. But what I have heard many Indigenous people say is look to the land for your answers, because literally there is wisdom. And I don't just mean this in a spiritual way, although there is, you know, a spiritual connection there to be found. There is a very practical source of wisdom in nature. And that's what biomimicry allows us to access. So this is, I was thinking, would be a good moment to pause and have a chat. Maybe I'll just give the definition of biomimicry in case that is an unfamiliar word for many of you. So biomimicry is reconnecting with, learning from, and emulating nature. So it's literally like we can look at the level of form, like what's this shape in nature, like a hummingbird's beak or a whale's fin, or, you know, the way that the fractals in a flower petal are, and what can we learn from that to design a form in a human product, to make a train more efficient, to make a plane use less fuel, to make an antibacterial surface, to make something that doesn't have water, you know, that water rolls off of. Like, so that's biomimicry of form. But we can also look at biomimicry of process, like trees, green plants, amazing, make energy from the sun. They don't use fossil fuels. They don't create any waste while they're doing it. What can we learn from them to have unlimited energy, you know, in our society, and many other things like that. And then there's biomimicry of system, which looks at a whole system like a forest or a wetland and says, how does this system create conditions for all these different living beings to thrive and to exchange resources and information and to cooperate? So when I say we can learn from nature, I really mean we can study how nature has evolved to solve pretty much every problem that a living being or system could ever have. Let's pause there and have maybe like a 2-minute bio break and me go and get my battery, you know, my cable, and then pop any questions in the chat and we can talk when I get back. Okay. We have power. I am back. All right. So thanks for bearing with me. Let's have a look in the chat. Oh, starting with a big one. How can we balance a fundamentally capitalist system with sustainable development? Are the two at odds or can they be reconciled? I have issues with the word, both the words sustainable and development, so we can get to that in a minute. But does biomimicry require intact systems, or is that a false idea? Good question. Are there any cultural, historical, or contemporary that you consider Indigenous in the UK? Cultures, historical, or contemporary that you consider Indigenous in the UK? God, these are some big questions, people. Bunch of smarty pants. Right. Let's have a go. How can we balance a fundamentally capitalist system with sustainable development? Who is that from? Forest School Association. Is that you, Matt? Tell me a little bit more about that question. What are you? Oh, hello. It's your turn.
There's an extra one. It's just that we obviously live in a society that is fundamentally capitalist, based on competitive growth. I'm not saying that it seems to work, but people are thriving in some aspects of our societies. Some people are definitely not. But you're talking about in that first slide, you were talking about the different cultures and going from that culture of independence and is sort of that competition, moving to a more collaborative approach. Now, how does that work when we've got a system that is based on competition and competitive advantage, even down to green technologies and things like that? At the moment, where I am near Worthing, there's a whole new development of wind-powered wind farms, and there are tenders going out left, right, and centre for people to be in charge of these ridiculously large wind farms that are meant to be, you know, carbon neutral or, you know, carbon negative. But we're purporting this idea of competition, and this company is going to achieve it, so it's going to be growing, and it's.
Yeah, I think with any of these really big changes, where I've come down kind of on it is, what's the level of change that I can engage at? You know, I don't seem to be able to. Okay, anyway. Yeah, so we can't necessarily change the culture or the paradigm ourselves as an individual, right? And also, I don't think we can necessarily wait for governments or, you know, some global collective to say, let's just change everything and get rid of capitalism. So for me, the kind of level of scale that we can activate at is a kind of local community or regional scale. So I feel like there are many different ways that we can start to behave in more cooperative ways and less extractive ways in our own lives, right? We can support initiatives in our local communities. We can start to relocalize food. We can start to rewild green spaces around us. We can start to talk about and role model a culture that is more kind, that is more cooperative, that is more kind of well-being centric and living systems centric. And we can join up with other people that are doing that, and we can just be part of this kind of grassroots movement that's emerging. Because just recycling and just doing, you know, like trying to do it yourself, like I'm going to fly less or eat less meat or, you know, do my recycling, that's great. But it's, and yes, if we all do that, that is going to help, and we all do need to do more of those sorts of actions. But the individual level of scale isn't going to lead to the tipping points that we need. And it seems like governments are moving too slowly, although some are better than others. It seems interestingly that business and investors and philanthropists are starting to move faster. So that is great, but it's not something that I can impact myself because I'm not any of those people. So it gives me some hope when I see pension funds divesting from fossil fuels and things like that. That's great. If you want more good news like that, by the way, sign up to the newsletter called Fix the News. It used to be called Future Crunch, and it's one of my mental health tools. You can get it free once a month or just on their website, but because I need it every week, I pay the whatever it is, $30 a year to get it delivered into my inbox every week. And they collect the stories from all around the world of things that are happening, that are tipping things more towards maybe the future that we would want and the systems that we would want. It's from reputable sources. It's pretty well researched, and I haven't noticed anything too completely nuts in it yet. So I'd really recommend that. But yeah, so I think working at the community level and the regional level is probably the best kind of level of scale that we can start just moving into more cooperative and less extractive and more kind of regenerative systems in lots and lots of different ways. And I don't like the word sustainable anymore. There's another podcast I'll recommend called what's the name of it? It's a biomimicry podcast. And actually this particular series is hosted on two podcasts. One's called The Native Seed Pod, which is an Indigenous led podcast. And the other one's called something like Nature Knows, or anyway, it's the biomimicry podcast. And together they've had a 4-part series looking at how to harmonize biomimicry and Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous traditional ecological knowledge. And one of the lovely things they talk about there is the word sustainable and the word regenerative, right? And they ask the question, why would we want to be sustainable anymore? Because why would we want to sustain the current status quo, which is already causing harm to so many people and to the planet? What we actually need to do from here is regenerate. We need to repair, we need to heal, we need to rewild, we need to do agroecology, you know, we need to build cooperative neighborhoods and new politics. So they talk about regeneration rather than sustainability. So anyway, that's my kind of slight patchwork. I don't have all the answers, but that's where I'm putting my energy. And when I read sort of papers on social change, it seems to be that a lot of people think that's where some of the tipping points can happen, is, and where just those of us that are just normal everyday people that aren't philanthropists or investors or CEOs of big multinationals, like where we can have an impact, I think, is at the community level and through our own work. And the other thing I've read is that don't just be the change, talk about being the change, because actually it ripples out much further when we don't just do it, but we talk about it. And there's a lot of research about that as well. It's like people getting solar panels. If you just get solar panels, no one else on your street gets them. But if you talk about it, everyone else starts to get them too. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, does biomimicry require intact systems? Okay, so I think I probably mentioned, Josh, because you were at that talk, weren't you? Because I remember you smiling and nodding and being very supportive in the audience. Thank you for that. You're doing it again this evening, which is very helpful. But biomimicry of system, yeah, it's very useful to have a system to base it on. And in Project Positive, which is the Biomimicry 3.8 Biomimicry Institute's project where they're working with big companies to design net positive like data processing centers and big factories and things like that. What they do is they find the nearest kind of healthy ecosystem that's providing a kind of full range of ecosystem services. So it's capturing carbon, it's providing habitat, it's providing food, it's supporting biodiverse assembly of species, it's cleaning air and water, you know, it's building soil. So it might not be an original or an intact landscape, but it's a healthy, thriving ecosystem. And then I believe what is then done, and I've been reading quite a few papers about applying this to urban environments recently as well. So there's a fantastic academic in New Zealand called Maybrit Pedersen-Zari, and again, I can add her work to the reference list, who's been doing ecosystem services analysis. Like she has this tool where you look at what are all the amazing services that an ecosystem provides that create the conditions for life to thrive. And then you've got kind of like, okay, well, these are the things we need to aim for then in designing our neighborhood or our town or our housing development, or, you know, so this is maybe more something that kind of partnerships of community groups working with local councillors and architects and things might work with. So it's a kind of slightly different level of scale. But yeah, so that's a way you can kind of go to the nearest thriving ecosystem, learn from that ecosystem how it's doing those things, dealing with waste, dealing with water, you know, dealing with water, creating habitat, building soil, and then you set those goals for your own region or your city or your neighborhood or your housing project or whatever it is that you're doing. And I just think that's cool, you know, that you can literally learn to that level how an ecosystem does those things and then think about how you might do those things. And I guess as forest school practitioners or outdoor leaders, we might not be working with, you know, urban designers or sustainable architects. Maybe we are sometimes. We might be working with 8-year-olds or with teenagers, but we can still get them to go outside and, you know, firstly, deeply connect with nature so they feel the wonder and the awe and the empathy and all that really cool stuff. But then to start asking good questions and setting interesting activities where we say, so how do different species in nature support each other? Or how does nature deal with waste? Or how does nature make energy without using fossil fuels or taking anything out the, you know, the ground that causes harm? How does nature cooperate? What do different species do to help each other? This is where I also had some more slides. I'm forgetting to show any of my slides. Like I said, I'm not very slide oriented. Hang on. Let's show some slides about how nature does this stuff. Let's get past those for a minute. So yeah, like one of the fun things we can talk to young people about is just getting them thinking about energy production and how nature does that. Get them to think about waste cycling and how does nature do that? Or cooperation. Cooperation is a great one. There's so many fantastic examples of cooperation in nature. So this one's a cleaner shrimp cleaning the inside of a moray eel's mouth, which is a very cool thing to have seen. Here, of course, is Nemo, or an anemone fish, which has a cooperative relationship with anemones where they get protection from predators by hiding in the anemones, and they have like this slime that stops them getting stung. And then my favorite animals, sea otters, which I studied for my PhD. They're a fantastic example of cooperation and interdependence in systems because they are a keystone species in kelp beds. So yeah, anyway, I'm going way off course on the question, do you need an intact habitat? We'll come back to this later. So answer the question anyway, and every other question that you didn't answer, Josh. Yeah. Oh, you did ask another one. Are there any cultures, historical or contemporary, that you would consider indigenous in the UK? Oh my God, that's a hard one, isn't it? I couldn't personally put my finger on a particular culture or name a particular people. I mean, my understanding, hazy understanding, is that the Celts came here very gradually over a long time and kind of integrated with people that were here pre-Celtic kind of times. And so it wasn't so much a colonization as a kind of gradual migration and integration. So, and I think we still have some knowledge of Celtic times, but then even then it tends to be in Roman writings, so it's quite hard to pick that stuff up. However, I did take on board the the challenge, the invitation of an Indigenous teacher that came to speak at an Art of Mentoring in Scotland in 2019, when he said, just do your best to find out about your ancestors from the land that you're part of, or the traditions of your land. And if you can't learn the history, then learn directly from nature. Just go out to nature regularly and learn from nature, because culture, the culture of land connected peoples, comes from their direct relationship in nature over many, many, many years. So and then that was kind of a transformative moment for me to think, oh, culture comes from our relationship with nature, because when you're relying on your surroundings for your survival, to not get eaten by something and to find shelter and to find food and to know what the seasons are going to do, you start to develop culture and practices around that, right? Seasonal celebrations, or gratitude for the particular fruits or nuts that come at certain times of year, or a particular spiritual practice to protect certain trees. Or so culture comes from our relationship to land and place. And so if we've lost that, then we can develop it again by directly relating to land and place again, and starting to tend the land and grow food and forage and repair things and just go out and observe. So it's another pathway to developing regenerative culture, is by building that relationship to place and land. Any other questions coming up? The wall of grief related to polycrisis that Deborah mentioned is talked about in Joanna Macy's work. Yes, it is. And as Joanna Macy's work, despair and empowerment work, is fantastic. I've done a few courses with her over the years, and that can really help. And she's also worked with Chris Johnston, and they have the book Active Hope, and he has another book, Find Your Power. And those are all full of like really practical activities to kind of go on that journey, and to take your participants on a journey through like connecting with the difficult things in the world, and then coming out the other side with active hope, with next steps, with new perspectives. And I would really recommend, I mean, it's all quite open source on their websites and so on. So I'd recommend checking Joanna Macy and Chris Johnson out if you haven't already. Isabella Tree with her regenerative project in NEP. An example of contemporary Indigenous person. Yeah, maybe so. She's certainly trying to be. And actually, another fantastic book, which I brought to the conference, is Emergent. This is a really lovely book. And she talks about, rewilding conservation, rewilding agriculture. She talks about how the most biodiverse time in British history, the research seems to show, was when, what do they call it? We tended a mosaic patchwork of different habitats. So people were very much on the land, living on the land in settlements, coppicing, fishing, farming, but in kind of a small, diverse mosaic of different patchwork habitats. And that is actually a fantastically biodiverse way to live. So it's this idea that, with Indigenous peoples, they live in the land. They're not kind of staying away from the land. And this is where fortress conservation has gone wrong in the past, right? By excluding people from the land. And then the land starts to, like in Portugal and Spain, where people have all moved into cities, the tree detritus and the scrub starts to accumulate, and then that contributes to forest fires. Whereas when people are living on the land, tending the land, they're picking that up for firewood, and they have a relationship with the land. And actually, we have co-evolved with our places. And we can learn to do that again. We can learn to be like a keystone species in our places, and to actually have a positive impact. And again, this is, I think, a mindset shift for kids, to help us realize, and the people we're working with, like, we can become a positive contributor and actually have a positive impact on the land that we're living in. So yeah, I think those sorts of rewilding projects and regeneration, where people are taking on bits of land and helping them come back to a place of thriving and health, are a good example of Indigenous practice, or traditional ecological knowledge, at least anyway. Obviously there's kind of spiritual and cosmology aspects from different Indigenous places that we don't want to be taking and applying in different contexts, but we can certainly be looking to ecological knowledge and sort of repairing our relationship with land. No, Emergence is by Miriam Kate MacDonald. And I think they have a land-based project up in the Midlands somewhere. They've got a website you can look at. Yeah, anyway. In terms of the biomimicry like bringing biomimicry and nature connection practices together. This is a fabulous book. Eyesight's, it's got a weird name, Nature Journaling for Biomimicry. It's only like one activity in it is journaling. The rest of it is all sorts of other activities. So I'm not sure why they've called it that. But it kind of, each one is a question, like getting people to go out and look at functions in nature, forms in nature, cooperation. Yeah, basically very practical activities you can do with groups to help them start learning from nature and nature's principles. So that's awesome. And hopefully most of you already know about Coyote's Guide to Connecting with Nature, which is all the deep nature connection and people connection practices and the 8 Shields design web. So, any other questions? Not for now. Let me just see if there was anything else I wanted to tell you about then. I mean, do we want to talk a bit about some of the core nature connection practices? Are people already using practices like sit spots or timeless wandering or bird language? Like, how familiar are you with those kind of 13 core routines of nature connection, or with any of the people connection and cultural element stuff? Have you tried those? Have you found that they work or not? Is that something we want to talk about a bit more tonight? Curious to know. Few nods. Can you take me off spotlight for a second and then I'll be able to see people a bit better? Okay, there's a few people not on video. All right. Someone's saying I'd be interested in the wandering and bird language. Just to hear a bit more about those, Josh. Okay. All right. So I'll give an example of how I would use a selection of core routines, right? In a say I was doing a day-long program with someone or a half-day program with a group. So I would probably get them to start with a sense meditation, where we would actually close our eyes and help people engage with their senses. So we'd start by, listening for the quietest sound that you can hear, and then listening in all 4 directions, just noticing the bird sounds, the traffic sounds, the wind sounds, but helping people drop into a different sense than just the visual sense. And then do smells. What are you smelling? What are you smelling in all 4 directions? What are the smells that are really, really faint? And then sensation, what can you feel? How do your clothes feel? How does the wind feel? How do your feet feel on the ground? How does your body feel? So dropping people into all the senses really helps with nature connection activities that come next, but it also helps settle the nervous system so that people are more open to connection experiences. So sense meditation is a really good activity to start with. And then you can get people to slowly open their eyes and ask them to kind of look at colour and shape and form, and to look around at each other and smile at each other and that kind of thing. But we usually start with the other senses than the visual. Then what I would get people to do is I would say, we're going to send you off into nature for a little while, just to have a bit of quiet time on your own. And you can, at this point, if you want to, you can use something called body radar, which is kind of a bit of fun, but it can develop into something a bit more profound as people do it more often. And you might just say, close your eyes and reach out in your imagination from here to, the surrounding area, and just get a sense in your body of a direction you want to go in, a pull towards something. It might be that this area and you feel attracted to the pond or the river or the hill, or you might not know the area at all. It's just an intuition to go somewhere. And then, still with your eyes closed, point your finger out and point in a direction. And then when you open your eyes, you're going to go in that direction. And then you're going to walk kind of slowly with all your senses open, really kind of noticing what's going on around you, until you find a spot where you want to sit down for a few minutes. And then when you find that spot, you're just going to sit there, and you might do another little sense meditation. And then you're going to be there for an unspecified amount of time, which you don't need to worry about. And we're going to call you back with some kind of call, which you agree, or a bell or a drum or whatever animal sound. And then while people are at their sit spot, you can literally just so they just find somewhere to sit, and you maybe leave them there 15 or 20 minutes. With the invitation to do a sense meditation, and then just notice what's happening around them. Notice the plants, notice the clouds, just sit and notice. Allow yourself time to drop in. Later on, you can build other layers of nature connection and nature questions into a sit spot. You can have people do something called the honouring routine, which is that as you walk to your sit spot, you stop for any birds or insects that are doing something and just kind of let them do their thing and cross your path rather than scaring them away, which is another way to kind of drop into a deeper relationship. Or if you've got a bit more time, you can have people just go off and wander until they find a sit spot, or you can have a separate wandering activity where you let people go off for sort of 20 minutes or half an hour. It depends on the age you're working with. If you're with younger kids, you might need to wander with them, but let them do just kind of unstructured exploratory stuff. You might want to do some barefoot walking. You might want to do a sensory walk. So some of these are probably practices that you all do anyway, but the timeless bit is kind of like dropping into a sense of like they don't know how long it's going to go on for. They kind of just drop into the present moment, start getting curious about things and exploring things and let things kind of, go off in little different directions. And yeah, depending on the age group, you'll have to figure out how you put the parameters in around sort of safety and so on. With adults, you can just let them go off and wander on their own for half an hour as long as you set a kind of boundary for how far it's okay for them to go. And for your own practice, I mean, I went off for a timeless wander with my camera, thinking I'd go out for an hour and a half last Saturday, and I ended up being out for 7 hours. And so the last 2 hours of that, I accidentally ended up on a guided tour of ancient hollowways of Dorset, just kind of serendipitously bumped into a guided tour that was happening and was like, oh yeah, that sounds good. So yeah, I went missing for the whole day basically, which was great and completely unexpected. And the bird language one is so in the core routines of nature connection, we talk about the five voices of the birds, which is really nice because I think people can get hung up on learning bird calls, which can be quite hard and challenging, and they're different all over the world as well. And I don't even know that many bird calls yet. I probably know 6 or 7 different species. But with the voices of the birds, you can help people kind of understand what the 5 different voices are. So you've got territorial singing, you've got companion calling, you've got juvenile begging, you've got alarm calling and aggression, right? Is that the 5? And it's quite fun to kind of act those out. You can get if you're feeling confident in your theatre skills, or even if you're not confident but you're willing to give it a go, you can find a buddy and act out companion calling to each other. I've seen people do that, which is hilarious. So I remember my friend and great tracker Dan Puplet up in Scotland doing a fantastic example of companion calling with someone else. They were kind of pretending to be birds on the ground, and they're cheeping to each other. Are you over there? Yes, I'm over here. Are you over there? Yeah, I'm still over here. Are you over there? Yeah, I'm still over here. Are you over there? Are you over there? Where are you? And then a gulping sound. Oh, sorry, I was eating a worm, but like you can kind of make it really fun. And then what happens is when you go out and you start listening to the birds, you start noticing different stuff that they're doing. And also, if you understand the kind of generally what alarm calling sounds like, that can lead to like a whole deep dive with bird language, because when you start hearing birds alarm calling and realize that it's probably you creating it and that you're creating this kind of ripple of disturbance, that can lead to you becoming quieter and slower and getting your group to slow down and to sit and do your sit spots. And as you drop into that different presence, the birds kind of go back to baseline and start behaving as they would if you weren't there, and you start being able to have a lot of different interactions with birds and other wildlife. Plus, if you recognize alarm calls, you can start reading the landscape. You can know when there's cats, you can know when there's foxes, you can know when there's birds of prey coming because you hear the birds start to alarm and the direction they're alarming in, and you look up and be like, oh, there's a sparrowhawk coming or something like that. So it can help you read the landscape. And again, this is what land connected peoples can do, right? They understand what's happening in nature and then what's happening in the wider landscape because they can kind of read those cues. That's a bit about bird language. There's a whole book about it that John Young wrote. He's the expert. And actually, if you haven't heard about John Young's new stuff, he's got a fantastic new online program called Living Connection First. And he's doing masterclasses and a membership. And me and my husband have been doing a few guest speaker slots on that. I think our next one is tomorrow, in fact. But there's going to be a new membership starting soon called Village Building, which is like nature-based community building, which me and my husband are going to be helping to run. So that's good. But then they also have all the core nature connection stuff, and then that's going to be the next level, which is nature-based community building. So that's coming soon. All right, what else do we want to talk about? Let me go back to my notes and see if there's anything that I wanted to say that I forgot to say. While you think if there's any more questions you want to ask me. What about, I don't know, do we want to talk more about 8 Shield stuff, or do we want to talk more about biomimicry and life's principles? Someone said 8 Shields. What would you like to know about 8 Shields? Unmute yourself and ask me a question. Do you need to unmute her, Matt?
Oh, I'm not sure. I kind of,
Yeah.
what question? Just more about it, you know. I know some things about each directions and what they represent, times of the day, the energy, and yeah, just your thoughts and your reflections over the years about it, just to give me a deeper level of understanding of it and how it can work.
Okay. All right. Well, so what I loved most after doing my first week of it, like doing the kind of flagship deep dive week-long program, was at the end. So you have all the experiences first, right? Which is one of the reasons that they call the new platform Connection First, is because the whole idea is that you have the experience first. Even if you're a practitioner that's kind of learning it so you can apply it yourself later, you get the experience first, and then you get the theory later, or the design frameworks later, so that we're engaging through participation first and like having doing it. It's like a whole body thing. And then you kind of learn about it with your head at the end, which is also just the methodology that I think works really well. But I remember being a bit of a nerd for frameworks and tools when they did give us the theory and the practices and the design framework at the end, like bursting into tears in the classroom, because I was like, oh my God, this is so awesome. So yeah, I love the design framework where they kind of hang the different tools and practices on the directions. And the reason for that is because as John Young and all the other practitioners over the years that he's worked with collected all these activities and practices, one of his kind of elders said to him, like, don't turn this into a bunch of lists, like try and figure out a nature-based framework you can hang it on. And so I think the way they did it was they asked a whole bunch of high school kids, like, how do you feel at this time in the morning or this time of the day? Okay, great, we're going to put the practices that are related to inspiration and newness and beginnings in the east, which is sunrise. So they kind of like built the practices to these kind of essential energies of different times of day, different times of year, different seasons. So that's how they're kind of collected, which I find very sort of elegant and intuitive to use. But what that also means is that with the design framework, you can design the flow of your day using the kind of like, so you've got then a set of tools that you can think about for how we're going to do a really good beginning, a good welcome, a good orientation for everyone, so they feel completely welcome and included and excited. And then we're going to orient everyone really well and remove any obstacles to them fully engaging and burn off some energy and, kind of get all that stuff going. Then you move into like the more focused activities. Then you're going to need some time for kind of rest and replenishment and self-care. Then you're going to want to have some more of that kind of like harvesting, reflecting, gathering, storytelling time. Then you're going to want some integration time, and then some kind of like, what do we do next? How does this apply to our lives? What will we do going forward with this? Which you can do at all sorts of different levels depending on the age group. And that's taking you through sort of east all the way through to north and then northeast again. And I just have found that once I started using that in my programs, they just went to whole new levels of connection, transformation, satisfaction. It was easier for me to design. It was more enjoyable to design. And they were better balanced, instead of like loads of doing, there would always also be enough resting or enough reflecting or enough storytelling and community time and fun time and all that kind of stuff. And then always thinking about making sure people had something that they could take forward or apply or whatever. So I find that very helpful. You can also use it as a team development tool for yourself and for other people in your team or your organization. So some people, you know, you start using terminology such as, oh, they're really easty, which means, oh, they're so good at beginning things and initiating things and being like exciting and inspiring and welcoming. But they're a bit rubbish at the details, you know, they're a bit rubbish at remembering to get the registration or the first aid kits or whatever. So they need to work on their south a bit more, their detail and focus and commitment stuff. Or they might be super northy, like the level of the design principles and the big picture, but trying to get them to, yeah, do the southy stuff can be a bit hard. I struggled with the northeasty stuff for a while, which is the like mindfulness, quiet mind, connection to creativity, just like stopping doing and having a bit more space for being, and the unstructured and the maybe the spiritual or the emotional. So I had to work on that, and sort of having that as a part of the design framework helped me go, oh, I'd quite like to develop that in myself. And the other thing I found really hard was the southeasty element has a lot around play and embodiment in it. And I don't know about you, but I kind of had that kind of went out of me as I got older. I think I forgot how to play and be silly. And when I went on the Art of Mentoring kind of second level, which is the deep nature connection, where you're supposed to run around playing games and climbing trees and putting mud on your face and basically being 8 years old, I hated it. I felt so uncomfortable. And it wasn't until I went to another one a couple of years later, and I was one of the leaders for the 5 and 6 year olds, that then I got into it and learned to play again just by being with them all week and like catching tadpoles and eating berries and playing stupid games and singing the troll song. And my husband loves to tell this story because he says the first night before I was supposed to go out and work with them, because I'd been shifted from working with the teens to the 5-year-olds and I was not prepared. He said I was in floods of tears saying I'd forgotten how to play. And then 4 nights later, I came back and did the troll song and I was covered in mud. And he was like, I think you've remembered. So yeah, it kind of gives us a way to develop ourselves as you know, practitioners and leaders, and also to see what the gifts are in other people, and then also where they might want to develop themselves, so we can put people into roles they're naturally strong at, but we can also put people into edge roles, you know, where they can develop themselves and kind of grow. So I find it quite useful for that too. It's 9:15. Is there? But that's okay, because we're in the discussion mode, right, Matt? So we're not like off track or anything. Okay, good.
Josh, I had another question, which is a really good one, which was, is there a danger with biomimicry that people see what they're looking for?
What do you mean by that? Like, tell me a little bit more about the hazard you would see, or the pitfall.
Well, I know you come from a scientific background, so I guess you've got that discipline, which to some extent I imagine you still adhere to quite strongly. But I feel like I've become aware of in social media this kind of, for example, like almost this fascistic approach to like, well, you know, there's invasive species causing damage to this environment, so they have to be got rid of and killed and destroyed, and therefore that can apply that to the way that you approach to other people, for example, who might be. Oh, God. I mean, that's a bit of an extreme example, sorry to jump to fascism, but I mean, you know, you can look at a bird killing a worm and be like, strong people should destroy small, weak people. I just wondered if there's anything.
Thank you for pointing out the dangers of ecofascism, because this is actually a massive thing that is terrifying and can happen, right? There is such a thing as ecofascism. I never even knew until recent times that the Nazis were all into oneness and mindfulness and land and soil and ecological stuff. Like, I never got taught that. So yeah, ecofascism is a real thing. It's a real thing now, and people can take anything and turn it to those sorts of gains. And a lot of people are using biomimicry, the term biomimicry, to mean kind of biomimetics, like let's copy how this insect flies and make a really tiny surveillance drone or a weapon, right? That is a form of biomimicry. Biomimicry as a discipline and as a field, and the practitioners within biomimicry from the Biomimicry Institute and Biomimicry 3.8, which are the kind of big communities of practice and kind of study and teaching, they're very clear that there's these three pillars, which is reconnection, ethos, and emulation. And you can't do emulation without reconnection and the ethics side as well. So, and there is, you know, a discipline to it. It's a combination of biologists and designers really looking for kind of patterns and principles that help us create more regenerative systems. And the whole aim is that life creates the conditions for life to thrive. So if it's not life affirming, it's not biomimicry. But yeah, you can take any of these things and turn it to nefarious purposes. The same as you can take any technology and do that. So I think it's just really important to remember the ethics side, and to keep asking the question, does this support life to thrive? Does this support regeneration? Does this support the values and the ethics that, you know, are important to me, to us? Yeah, and that's a whole other, we could do a whole other webinar on ecofascism, couldn't we? And I don't know if I'd be the right person to do it, but it'd be fascinating to get some people in to talk about that.
I also kind of meant distrusting myself. Like, I can imagine in my sit spot watching something happening and being like, oh, you know, that means this to me, but perhaps that isn't what's really.
Well, that's where these life's principles can be helpful, right? So the Biomimicry Institute and biologists over the last 30 years have come up with these 26 living systems principles. Oh, and I do have a slide for this, so hang on. Let's get them back up. No, we were on the cooperation slide. So here we go. Ta-da! So yeah, so over the last kind of 20 years or so, the people developing the whole field of biomimicry have come up with these 6 kind of overarching principles, and then it comes to 26 principles in total. And it's basically, these are the principles that, tried and tested over a long time, they have figured out that all living systems and species follow. And I think these are very helpful because they have some very useful things in, like be locally tuned and responsive, leverage cyclic processes, use readily available materials and energy, cultivate cooperative relationships, be resource efficient, use low energy processes, recycle all materials, adapt to changing conditions, incorporate diversity. That's a very important one, especially if you're trying to counter fascism. Embody resilience through variation and decentralization, build from the bottom up, self-organize, you know, combine small modules into kind of nested fractals. And I think this is really interesting because biomimicry isn't about go out, see what nature's doing, make it up yourself what that means and apply it. It's biomimicry is a discipline that has principles and practices. And I guess as practitioners and outdoor leaders, what we're doing is maybe providing an activity, a question, a tool to help people learn these principles and then apply them. So we're not sending people out to come up with any old thing. We're going out to help them learn about cooperative relationships, or learn about diversity, or learn about cycling, you know, nothing is waste. So we do have kind of an aim in mind when we send people out to do biomimicry. We're not just saying, go copy anything and make up your own sort of outcome from it, you know, or your own perspective from it. Although people obviously will then use these in all sorts of creative ways, which is great. So there's a foundation, I guess is what I'm saying. All right, cool. Anyone else got anything, any other questions they want to ask? These, I mean, there's a lot of really fantastic, one of the things I like about the biomimicry community is they have a huge number of open source materials. So there's this fantastic resource called Ask Nature, and you can go in and sort of plug in, how does nature do X, Y, Z? And it'll come up with all these nature-based examples of how different animals and species do that, which is really cool. And they have loads of downloadable resources. They've also got a nice introduce biomimicry to your community half-day workshop, like a 3-hour thing you can do with all the like, here's how you start, this is the activity you can do, then send people out to do something like that, and here's some of the basic principles. So there's loads of nice stuff that you can use as educators if you want to start bringing a little bit more of this kind of living systems design into what you're doing. And I think it's really important because that kind of premise I was trying to point to earlier on is that getting people super connected is wonderful, but if they don't feel like they've got the skills or a place to look for answers or ideas or create, you know, solutions, it can feel so overwhelming. But when you've got something where you can go, oh, look, I can look to nature and nature will help us solve a particular problem, like how are we going to produce energy in a green way, or how are we going to deal with waste, or how are we going to build stronger communities? Because you can apply this at both an infrastructure level and a social level. Like a lot of biomimicry also applies to social groups. So it is very useful in terms of giving people skills that can give them a sense of agency and empowerment to make change, which is one of the things I love about it, and it's helped me so much by learning about it. So I would say, yeah, it's definitely worth exploring if you do want to help the people you're working with not just connect, but also feel like I can contribute, I can be a participant in change. And one of the things I do like to emphasize is that I think one of the things that happened for me by kind of deeply reconnecting with nature and then learning how nature works in networks, in systems, with everything having its own niche and its own processes, but being deeply related with each other, is it kind of helped me shift from that kind of rescuer savior perspective I was talking about earlier of like, I've got to find the magic button or the magic lever that will help me feel like I'm making a difference, to, oh, I just have to do my bit in the ecosystem. I just have to be this tree or this process, or, you know, it's like, oh, I just need to find the bit that's really meaningful to me, which I've now realized is learning from nature and telling other people about that. Like, that's what I love. And it's really important to know that other things are needed. Like, yes, we need to alleviate poverty, and we need to uplift social justice, and we need to have different ways of doing decision making and democracy. And I'm not an expert in those things, but I know they're important. I know they're part of the ecosystem of change, and I can uplift them, and then I can specialize in an area that I can do, you know, day in, day out, that I'm good at and that gives me joy as well. It's like it's a both and. But it stopped me thinking I have to be good at everything and do everything, and actually cooperate more with other people, you know, or just like uplift what they're doing as well. Yes, you can have my slides and links to resources, definitely. What would probably work best, because I don't have your contact details, is if you just go on my website, which is www.deborahbenham.com, and just drop me a little contact form on there, or go to LinkedIn. I think I'm just Deb Benham, or Deb Benham PhD, because there was another Deb Benham on LinkedIn, and drop me a little connection, something or other. And then once I've got all those in a couple of days, I'll send you all this stuff. It's coming to the end, so I should just tell you about one or two other things that are coming up that you might be interested in. Is that all right, Matt? So if you want to do more H Yields Art of Mentoring Connection First stuff, there is actually a camp for the first time since COVID happening this summer, which is the 4th to the 10th of August. And there's going to be some fantastic practitioners from around the country there. I'm going to be there too. And I think there are still some kids spaces, and there's definitely still adult spaces, and there's a few different what we're calling guilds that you can get involved with. So if you want to specialize in nature connection, or if you want to specialize in village building, or if you want to specialize in kind of primitive skills, there's like a bunch of different ways to get involved. So that's coming up. A couple of podcasts coming up, which I told you about, and I'll put those on my website so you know when those are happening. And the nature-based community building coming up with John Young. We're going to be teaching with him, probably starting in July-ish. So let me know if you're interested in that. Yeah, and just would love to connect with you. So connect with me on LinkedIn if you want. I am on Instagram, but I haven't got around to posting much on there yet. But I guess if a few people follow me, I might feel compelled to start posting something. Yeah, and if you want to chat about any of this stuff more, I have actually set up a Calendly link on my website, so you can just kind of request like a half-hour chat about something is relevant to your work, and we can do that. Because I'm still exploring all this and finding out what people want and need and what would be useful to you as practitioners. So it's really valuable to me as well to hear like how this stuff lands with you and how you might use it. So genuinely, yeah, invite you to do that. And I hope this has been helpful. Oh, and I've got a fun slide at the end. Let me just put the last slide up, or the last couple of slides up, which is kind of my irreverent summary. So first of all, the serious bit. This is where I've come to these days. And I love this image of like the golden net in the sea. This is the image I always see in my head now when I think about interconnection, is like this golden net, this web of life that we're all part of. that's constantly shifting and changing, and I'm just one node, and that node can be super bright sometimes and other times be like quiet while I rest or do something else. But that's okay, because there's all these other nodes doing cool stuff too. But yeah, coming to that kind of mindset of we belong here. None of us needs to save the world on our own. We only need to find our gifts and weave them into the wider web. We can all participate and contribute within the wider ecosystem of change. Nature can be a guide for us, and we can share nature's wisdom and solutions with others. And let's do it together, because it's rubbish when we try and do it on our own and much too tiring. And ideally, if we do all of this stuff, we can create a future we're proud to leave behind. And another way to put it would be more otter, because these are my favourite animals. I studied them for my PhD. They're keystone species in their ecosystem. They contribute so much value to their ecosystem. They cooperate within their community and look out for each other. And yet they've all got their own little niche, their own specialism on what they eat, so that they're not competing with each other, even though they all live in the same kelp bed habitat. They all have different specialisms. And they know when to play and rest as well. So we should too. So that's my little silly summary.